Welcome to Fundingportal's webinar on new COVID-19 stimulus programs and how to get funding. Thank you for joining us. My name is Karen Fournier, and I will act as technical moderator today. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that your lines will be muted during the call. However, you can type in questions at any time using the webinar Q&A tool. We will answer your questions towards the end of the webinar at 12:45. Pour ceux d'entre vous qui parlent français, les présentations aujourd'hui seront livrées en anglais, mais vous pouvez toujours nous poser des questions dans la langue de votre choix en utilisant l'interface. Vous pouvez aussi nous envoyer un courriel ou nous appeler plus tard. We will also reach out via email with a copy of the slides later today, and we will invite you at that time to confirm your subscription to our newsletter to get the latest funding news. Joining me for the call today is Fundingportal President and CEO Teri Kirk. Teri, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen, and we're so pleased at the turnout. We have about companies participating on the line today. I think it speaks to the extent to which we're all kind of joining hands and trying to figure out our way in the new economy. So we're here to tell you about what's out there for your business and how to apply. We're pleased to be joined by our partners, Crown Capital, which is a provider of debt solutions into organizations as diverse as municipalities and companies, and also by two partners within the Torstar family, iPolitics and Queen's Park Briefing. These are specialty newsletters that a number of you would subscribe to that really help us all to understand what's happening at Centre Block in Ottawa and at Queen's Park in Ontario, and often out into other provinces as well. So welcome to our partners, Crown Capital, iPolitics, and Queen's Park Briefing. And we'll turn now to our agenda. We're going to be very practical in our scope. We know that businesses are all feeling in crisis and really looking for very practical information on how to move forward in the new economic circumstances in which we find ourselves. So we'll look first at what are the top measures. This is a blend of existing programs that have had their mandates refocused, as well as new measures. Secondly, we'll look at the very practical question of how to apply. It's one thing to know about the money, but everybody's goal is to get their fair share, and then we'll open it up to you for Q&A. I'm very pleased as president of Fundingportal to be able to provide a service to Canadian businesses at this particular time. We were established in 2012 with this particular mandate to help companies to navigate the grants and incentives financing marketplace. We often attribute the idea for our national bilingual funding portal that now operates in 3 countries, Canada, US, and UK, to Tom Jenkins, the founder of OpenText, and he said, I think very effectively, that Canada has a lot of money in the form of grants and incentives. It's around $40 billion at this time. Yes, $40 billion in grants and incentives that go out the door in Canada at this time. But he did highlight the problems that businesses have a very hard time finding these programs and successfully applying. And that's what we are here to do for companies like yours. Let's turn then, Karen, to our top 3 measures. We really believe it's important for companies to focus on kind of a top 3. You're not going to apply to 30 or 50 or 70 of these things, but one is often a bit too narrowly focused. So think about what are the top 3 measures for your organization. That will vary depending on what sector and region and size you are, but in general, they fall into 3 broad categories. The first category is employment stability measures. These have been very topical in our newsletter and in national papers, and of course at iPolitics and Queen's Park Briefing. We encourage you to subscribe. I'll tell you a bit more in detail about how you can stay up to date on these news through specialty vehicles. But the kind of big 3 to point out are the Canada Wage Emergency Subsidy. As we know, this was amended this week. I think it highlights the notion that this is a very dynamic environment, one where new programs are announced and a week later they're a bit different. Happily, they're kind of getting better and better, I think, in response to the deepening crisis and also by representations made by different labor and business groups. So the wage subsidy has been enriched. It was started off as a 10% subsidy and is now up to 75% of wages. And the second change is it has been expanded beyond small businesses to any employer. So that includes charities, nonprofits, and both large and small enterprises. It is a wage subsidy, so you have to have wages to qualify. So self-employed workers are not really likely to qualify for this particular program. Secondly, you have to be able to demonstrate that your revenues have fallen by a significant portion, and that's been set at 30%. We're still waiting for some further details around how exactly that can be calculated, but I think, basically it's fairly straightforward math to be able to show a before picture and an after picture. The program will cover up to 75% of employees' wages, but not actual wages. The wages will be deemed to be a certain maximum number, and that is $847 a week. So that works out to more of let's say a laboring type wage that governments are going to subsidize. They won't be subsidizing 75% of wages of high earning professionals. It's retroactive to March 15th, so that's just a couple of weeks ago, and it's capped at an annual salary of just under $60,000 a year. So that's that program. We're still waiting for more details, but I think the good news is that the wage subsidy is applying to more organizations and at a much higher level. The second program is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB, and it's providing a taxable benefit. So this one's for employees. I would mention really that the Canada Wage Emergency Subsidy is paid to employers, and the second program, the CERB, is focused on the needs of employees, and it will, if you are laid off, it will provide a taxable benefit of $2,000 per month for up to 4 months, so a total of kind of $8,000 for workers who lose their income due to the pandemic, and for workers who are not eligible for EI. So it truly is an emergency response benefit for a subcategory of employees during a period of crisis. And then we have special work sharing measures as well, and these are for EI eligible employees who are receiving income support and are suffering reduced work weeks. And the maximum duration of this program at this point has been extended to 76 weeks, 18 months. Gives us maybe some insight as to how long the government is seeing that this crisis may continue, and certainly a kind of post-recovery period of adjustment for employees and employers as well. And it does require a joint submission by employees and employers together. Let's turn then to a bit more of a sectorial focus, and we're going to highlight a few measures that for key sectors. And one is ICT, the Internet Communications and Telecom sector, which is a very big one, and where kind of key innovation sector is kind of working within ICT. So we're really pleased to highlight the Broadband Fund. We think it's an excellent subsidy for our economy stimulus and a really important program. It does two things. It helps organizations to move forward with providing broadband capability into remote and regional areas, and will allow those workers who don't have access to broadband to more equally participate in the digital economy. It's a CRTC program. The good news, it's been extended to April 30. We have 3 new mandates that have come in this week that we're now doing. The deadline was last week, so that's been extended, and I think for those who can move quite quickly, it is a very complex application process. We provided a whole webinar on it. So I think you should consider the de facto kind of deadline to be, let's say, kind of middle to end of next week to be moving forward with starting the application process. We've got deep experience In that sector, I happen to be a former vice president for Bell Canada, and we have a great team of people who are working to help with applications into the broadband fund. I'm also really pleased to introduce our guest analyst for the ICT sector. His name is Josh Axler, and he's with Crown Capital. Josh is a CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, so great guy to analyze large projects and financing needs. He's an MBA from the Richard Ivey School. For those of you who don't know Crown, it is a public company and providing a significant provider of mid-cap debt facilities. So I'm going to ask Josh just a few questions then about what's going on in the ICT sector, and then we'll be turning to some of the other sectors if this one isn't relevant to you. So Josh, tell us a bit more about the Broadband Fund.
Thank you, Teri. Absolutely. So the Broadband Fund was created by the CRTC last year, and it's a $750 million fund that basically allows for a public-private partnership to put wireless internet into remote and rural areas that wouldn't be able to set up this infrastructure alone. What it allows for is communities and companies to partner together to make non-viable, non-economically viable projects viable. So Crown is actively working with a number of communities to work to access some of these funds and combine that with capital from Crown to basically bring high-speed internet to communities that wouldn't have it before.
Wonderful. So who gets to benefit from this? So where will the money flow, Josh?
So the money flows directly to the communities, and they have to work with partners both from a telecom partnership, so someone who can actually provide the capabilities, but they also need a private capital supporter. So the government is not going to provide 100% of the capital, so you need a partnership that really combines all the facets together. So a good example of this is a municipal telecom project that we're working on right now. And actually Fundingportal is involved in helping the communities apply directly for the CRTC funding. So the great thing about that is they're utilizing the expertise of someone like Fundingportal to really make sure that they're going to go out and capture as much available funding as possible. And then they work with a company like Crown to actually really fill in that funding gap to get the project done. Without the government funding, this wouldn't be a viable project that Crown would be able to participate in. But combined with the commitment from the communities to be anchored tenants, long-term commitments for wireless funding and wireless communications in these areas, plus the government grants and funding from Crown, the partnership makes sense.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. And I might mention, of course, at the Crown level as a provider of capital, then they focus more on some of the big municipal projects. I would mention that we are also working at Fundingportal with lots of small ISPs, people in rural communities, Lake Superior, outside Lindsay, and so on, where, if you can believe it, there still isn't access to high speed. So it's a real range of applicants who can benefit from this, and we encourage people to have a quick look and do it now. It's a under the last program, about 40 to 85% of the capital costs borne by the private sector are being subsidized by the government. So it is very, very unique in that way. Let's turn to a couple of other sectors then. Clean tech and energy. So we've covered kind of the general wage programs that are available to companies across the board. We've looked at one large sector in Canada, ICT. I'd like to turn to clean tech and energy, and really pleased to have brought in another expert from Crown who focuses on this particular sector. I'm going to take a moment, though, and tell you about some of the programs there aimed at Canada's very important clean tech and energy sector. So the ERA Alberta, the Emissions Reduction Alberta, is one program. Let's talk a bit about this. This is a pre-existing program for which the deadline has been extended. So this is one of the ways that our governments are dealing with the crisis is A, repurposing funds within existing programs, B, extending the deadlines, as is the case for the Broadband Fund and also for this particular program to allow more funding to flow and more companies participate and get access to the money. So excellent to see that extended by more than 2 weeks, plus further capitalization of the program as well. So great measures. The Alberta government has also announced $113 million in industry relief. This is coming in through its energy regulator, and they're basically granting one-year extensions for and loans up to $100 million to the Orphan Well Association. We won't go into too much detail about these programs because there probably aren't a lot of people on the line who are qualified, but feel free to follow up with us on these programs. Let's turn then to our guest analyst for the energy sector, Adam Jenkins. Adam.
Thank you very much, Teri. It's a different time, or it's a difficult time with all the commodity price fluctuations and the changing requirements that are being driven from investors during this time as well. So municipalities and different companies are really being driven towards stronger ESG targets. And that puts demands on businesses to be more efficient from both a cost and a carbon intensity standpoint. So what we've seen and some of the grant money that's available, there is a significant amount of grant money available for these initiatives, which leads to an opportunity for these investments in alternative energy projects. This grant money is typically a portion of what your capital is, obviously, and like Josh had said earlier, it tends a project that may have some challenges for investability into a project that you can that is widely financeable with the appropriate partner with a broad funding mandate.
Excellent. And give us a sense of some of the projects you've been working on in the energy sector, Adam. Yeah.
No problem. There's some really interesting projects out there and some interesting ideas and everything from new alternative energy, so solar installations and solar projects, to some of the really interesting ones that are either in commercial and industrial buildings or in municipalities using combined heat and power generation to provide a few different things, which is energy and power reliability. As power prices are going up, we all want reliable, affordable, and a consistent power price. So, and using the heat from these on-site power generations to actually supply your building heat. And what that does is it lowers your greenhouse gas intensity by increasing the efficiency of what the installation does. So an example of this would be at a rec center in a municipality, for example, where you can power all of your lights and your building power requirements and use the heat to, whether it's building heat or to heat a swimming pool, or even in Ontario doing some ice melting at hockey rinks and different avenues like that in order to get this funding and to get these projects. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really broad-based. I might say that obviously energy, GHG reduction, a low-carbon future, alternative energy are very strong areas for investment by governments in Canada at the provincial and federal level. Probably represents about a third of the flow of grants and incentives in Canada. And it's all about innovation. There's no kind of money for business as usual, but those who are trying to identify new ways to migrate our economy and uses in that direction can do very well under the programs. We didn't mention automotive, but significant new programs really independent of COVID to drive electric cars and multiple versions of those, charging stations to support them within retail complexes, and multi-unit residential buildings. So thanks so much. I really appreciate you weighing in on those issues for us, Adam. Let's turn then to other measures, again, that are less sectorial in focus and more broad application to kind of everyone on the line. And these are a flow from 3 or 4 or 5 of our biggest established organizations that have been the source of grants and incentives and government stimulus for decades. One is the 2 kind of twin Crown Corps, BDC and EDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada and Export Development Bank of Canada. They're pretty quick off the mark because they have highly distributed networks all across Canada, retail outlets, and digital services for small businesses. I mentioned, no, I probably didn't mention, but somebody at BDC told us the other day, an executive, that they've had more demand for their loans in the last 4 days than they had in the entire fiscal year last year. So tremendous demand by everyone on the line for new sources of credit to get through the crisis, and these organizations are the primary vehicles for doing so. There have been a lot of complaints, of course, that the measures aren't strong enough or fast enough. They are, in the end, debt facilities, and people have to qualify for debt, and there are many, many, many small businesses, of course, who don't qualify for this type of debt funding, and so some positives, but also some real concerns, I think, in the business community that the country, that we haven't gone far enough yet in really developing solutions for small businesses. So just getting a bit more granular, there's a business credit availability program, the BCAP, which is a new program that's been rolled out, and it's administered by BDC and EDC, and is providing $10 billion in net new funding associated with this crisis of their kind of core lending and credit insurance products. Moving on to IRAP. IRAP is the Industrial Research Assistance Program of Canada. It's been around since just after World War II, probably close to 40 or 50 years now. It's the single largest funded program for flowing money to the innovation sectors for micro companies, mostly doing sort of patentable research, and they have announced a new COVID-19 challenge program where their discretion over who gets funded is being heavily oriented toward companies that can come up with COVID-related solutions. So good to know that their doors are open. There have been rumors, I think, that IRAP isn't funding at this time, but our clear understanding is that they absolutely are. But there is a very strong bias toward innovation that is COVID-oriented. And then I would mention on the procurement side, PWGSC has announced new, that's Public Works, and that's a big federal procurement agency that flows contracts instead of grants to the private sector. And their plans to mobilize industry to fight COVID are a bit like IRAP's, but it's based on awarding contracts as opposed to providing grant funding. So again, a real shift away from sort of funding anything right now to funding COVID-oriented programs, and some of you are able to pivot. And we've certainly been working with quite a few companies who nobody was talking about COVID 6 months ago, and of course are pivoting their solutions to be responsive. The last organization I would mention are the superclusters, and in Ontario, it's called NGen, but as you may know, governments have moved to identifying private sector partners to flow the government money out into particular regions and sectors. And so within Ontario, the focus here is on advanced manufacturing, and NGen is the vehicle that receives federal money to make more private sector-oriented decisions, shall we say, around how that money flows into the advanced manufacturing sector. And again, the superclusters and other areas are AI in Montreal and health in British Columbia. So each of the superclusters have been really mandated to shift their focus to solutions that are more COVID-oriented. Let's then look at some of the other federal measures, and then we'll have a look at some of the provincial measures, and then we're going to hear from our government relations expert from iPolitics and QP Briefing. So some of the other federal measures include the regional economic development agencies. So some of you may know that government incentives flow through grants and tax credits, which are different from the debt and equity instruments that the private sector uses. And the government money tends to flow either by sector. So you're in one of the sectors we've been highlighting, broadband, for example, ICT, automotive, energy, oil and gas, etc., but they also flow by region. And there are 6 major regional economic development agencies for each of the main regions in Canada, and their focus is less about sector and more about making sure that their region is stimulated and working through economic crises like the current one. So DEV serves Ontario. The Western Diversification Fund is in Western Canada. There's CEDQR for Quebec, the ECHO for the Atlantic agencies, CanNor in the north, and FedNor as well, slightly different regions of the north. So these are the big 6 agencies. Are very, very significant funders, and the benefits that they have in actually stimulating the economy these are well-established agencies. They've been in place for years and years. They have people and phone numbers, and they know how to put out applications and process and flow money. So my own view is that these will be critical in achieving the stimulus objectives of governments. They are repurposing their money, again, to focus heavily on COVID-type solutions. So each of these are open for business, but a practical word is that unless your proposal is highly oriented to today's crisis, then your chances of your application being successful are very limited. So we are working with our clients again on rethinking some of their applications to highlight how they are relevant to the current environment. Let's look then at some of the provincial programs. There are most provinces have put out at least 2 to 3 new COVID specific programs. We talked about some for the oil and gas sector alone in Alberta, a relatively small province. So we're not going to take the time to go through each of them. Rather, we're just going to highlight for you that the flow of stimulus money in Canada is about between 1/3 and 1/2 flows from the federal government, and the other kind of 1/2 to 2/3 flows from the provinces, all right? So very important for you to understand what your particular province is doing for you. These numbers on the screen demonstrate some of the amounts that are being promised by Canada's provinces to date, so net new funding to stimulate the economy. You can see that they add up to 13, 15, 16 or so billion dollars. So very significant funding. And the orientation to stimulate is that it needs to get out the door quickly. None of these stimulus objectives will be successful unless applicants bring forward applications really now. So we encourage you to do so. You can go to, we are posting details on all of these programs. So without having to go through your back copies of newspapers, you can go to fundingportal.com/grants101. And as its name suggests, it's designed to make all grants information kind of simple and intuitive and accessible for Canadian businesses. And click on your province and find the programs that are right for you there. Let's now turn to our expert, Alexandra Shannon, who's going to talk a little bit about why are governments doing this, how are they doing it, can we expect these programs to stay, what does it mean for you and your business. Alexandria is, I hope she won't mind me saying, a bit of a data nerd. She's studied at Stanford University in statistical learning. She's been had an academic fellowship at the European Commission focusing on data and incentives, and she's been leading iPolitics and Queen's Park Briefing over the last 5 years, really tracking government programs and making it understandable and accessible to businesses like yours. So, Alexandria, tell us a bit about what are the kind of macroeconomic objectives of these programs and how do they translate into companies on the phone?
Certainly. Thanks for having me, Terry. So very bluntly, this is a time of unprecedented change. I think we can all agree to that. And what we're seeing on our end is the continuous communications of these new incentives and stimulus packages as a critical first step for governments to decide on a path and then announce them and then effectively put them into place. And now more than ever is the relationship between government and industry being strengthened and fast-tracked. What we're seeing is the swift removal of red tape to help businesses and the citizens they employ. The governments are making daily announcements, then quickly partnering with the private sector to roll them out. And this is effectively a case study in helping organizations capitalize on government incentives, which are critical to achieving the policy objectives that they're outlining. We are seeing, a more connected country through the broadband incentives that I know that you discussed earlier. We're seeing a more pandemic-ready community through the biotech incentives, and ultimately a diversified energy economy through the measures that you previously spoke about as well.
Great. And what are your organizations, iPolitics and QP Briefing, doing to really help companies to better understand this rapidly changing environment and to benefit from the money that is available?
Well, iPolitics has a strong connection with the Canadian business community and associations that represent them. We've been working very closely with the Chambers of Commerce to accurately report on their efforts. A good reflection of this came from our on-record discussion with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce spokesperson, who discussed how the Ministry of Health is transforming their existing funding programs to compel domestic manufacturers to increase their production capacity. We have a dedicated industry and a team of analysts and reporters who are ultimately our trusted sources.
Yeah, very helpful to understand the work that you're doing. I guess there's sort of a new normal emerging. We had no budget document per se this year, perhaps the first time maybe since World War II. I don't know that accurately, but certainly a whole new way of communication. I'm sure that there's a particular role for the media and specialized newsletters and data and information sources like yours to help companies when the documents that they're so used to are disappearing or rapidly changing. Is that a fair comment?
It absolutely is a fair comment. And actually, to your point, this is only the second time in Ontario's history that we haven't had a tabled. So these changes are unlikely to disappear after the threat of a growing pandemic subsides. Beyond the March 13th $10 billion business credit availability program, with the credits flowing to small businesses through EDC and BDC, we can expect these larger scale stimulus announcements in the days, weeks, and months to come. I'm personally waiting to see these programs expanded to focus on growth as well as profit margins, which is really where organizations like Fundingportal can offer that assistance.
Well, congratulations to both your outlets and to Torstar, your shareholder, for I think stepping up and filling the gaps that you've talked about and highlighting the need to address, going back to Mr. Jenkins, who said there's lots of money out there, but companies have a hard time understanding where it is and what the programs are, and both of those are true in spades. More money than ever, but I think much more complexity in this financing marketplace for businesses to figure out what the programs are and where they apply and so on. So why don't we take a minute now and turn to that, Karen, We promised you kind of 3 parts to the agenda, focusing on what are the programs, but more importantly, we're not trying to make you academic experts today, but more to help you get this money. So let's turn to the practical questions about how to apply. At Fundingportal, we work with 3 different stakeholder groups within this government incentives marketplace. They all start with the letter A. So we work with the applicants, which are companies like yours, and helping you to find the programs and to get funded. We do that in 2 ways. We always have kind of a cheap and cheerful way, if I may say so, for organizations and startups who have no real money and are just looking for quick tips. So we have, we'll give you a bit more information on it. Our own newsletter, which is a weekly roundup, and it's free, and it ends up on our blog, which is Grants 101, which you can access on our website. So we encourage you to use some of our free tools. Grants 101, sign up for our newsletter. Today's webinar, we'll be providing a number of webinars that are sectorial over the coming weeks. These are the ways we can help you get funded for free at no cost to you. We also have some low-cost tools on our website, like our fund search is $50 to use once, and you can do it's much like using hotels.com, and within a few minutes you can identify the programs that are aligned with your objectives. If you want to use it more frequently, you can sign up and subscribe for a few $100s. Those are our kind of low-cost, no-cost solutions for you. We also have much more bespoke hands-on support for companies to get through this, where we're writing your broadband applications, writing applications into some of the programs that we've talked about, doing custom reports for you on right programs so you don't waste time applying to programs that aren't a good fit. We also work with the advisory community, lots and lots of advisors, law firms and accountants and chambers of commerce and so on are scrambling to keep people informed, and because we provide very unique data, we are helping firms like that, including Queen's Park Briefing and iPolitics, to have the latest data, and Crown Capital, of course, to have data and information to help you as well. So these are our kind of channel partners, and we're very appreciative of the roles they're playing in getting our information out into the marketplace. And finally, we work with administrators too. They're also struggling. We've been thinking about it only from our own perspective as companies and applicants, but funders are under tremendous pressure to get this money out the door and yet still make sane business decisions about qualifying companies for debt and so on. So we work with the province of Nova Scotia, for example, and making our tools available on their website, NSBI, the Nova Scotia Business Inc., and posting them on various cities' websites so stakeholders can come and go where they should be going, which is to cities and funders' websites and finding the data and analytics and tools that Fundingportal builds. Specifically then, how to move forward. We think that the process for any company, no matter what size, no matter what program it's applying into, unfolds through 3 discrete steps. The first, then, we like to use very plain language. Our goal is to simplify and not to complexify this whole process. So at step 1, we help companies to find the right programs. As we've talked about, this become more complex, not less complex, with many new programs, programs that have reoriented their funding and not their websites haven't necessarily caught up, deadlines that have been expanded. It's a very challenging world for companies to really find the right programs. Your success rate in getting funding will be heavily dependent on your ability to make the right choices and around which fund you're going to apply for. Our success rate is about 94%. We like to say that we basically don't write applications that don't succeed, and our ability to really find the right programs for you is a key factor in being successful on our clients' behalf. Applying for it, you must apply. There's no way to get this money without some kind of documentary process. There are 4,550 programs as of today in Canada, grants and incentives altogether at the federal and provincial level. Each one has its own distinct application process. So that's about 4,600 separate application processes. So understanding how to move forward under a particular program, whether audited financial statements are required, whether you need to be federally incorporated, etc., is a very, very complex process indeed. And so that's what you will have to do, or work with professionals who can do that for you. We do think it's important to highlight a third step. We call it leverage it. It's just a notion that companies do not reach out once to government and get all the money they will ever need or ever be eligible for. It's an ongoing, iterative kind of process. You will need often private sector matching funds to qualify. At this step, we help leverage successes in private capital markets, raising VC money to try and sort of double it through grants and incentives and vice versa, and also leverage success into bigger and better programs. We have some really exciting tools like our alert service, where you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, how do I stay informed about all these programs? We'll set you up for alerts, and they arrive as a custom email for you, letting you know that a new program is opened up, or the broadband fund extended its deadline, for example. So these are some of the ways that you need to think about moving forward on your own in applying in this world, or working with a firm like ours to help you do so. We have a few really specific helpful tips around how to move forward in this environment. Again, try and get as much information as you can on a low or no cost basis. I highlighted Fund News. There's a link there, and on our website, we've launched a new kind of COVID page, COVID portal effectively, in the top 1/3 of our homepage, and you'll see these links there. So Fund News is a weekly roundup. We've been sending it out 2 to 3 times a week in the last crisis days, and you can subscribe, and it's free, and it just is a very quick, easy email to read to stay in touch with this world. I've mentioned Fund Search. It's also on our homepage. It's $50, and you can do a custom search for yourself. We're also doing custom workups for organizations. You can order one of those. They're a bit more expensive because we have people doing really detailed analysis and research for you to really identify the winning programs that are aligned with your needs and your projects at this time. And I've just highlighted the grant alerts as follow on to searching for the right programs. You want to stay informed, and we have a subscription tool that allows you to do that on a very, very low cost basis. Let us do that hard work for you. So let's have a look at just some specific advice too. The COVID funds are competitive. They're not, ideas have to be well thought out. There's a lot of money, but it is in the end a discrete amount of money, and so, you will have to write a really winning competitive grant application to get this money. Don't forget, is our second advice, about the pre-existing programs. These are in fact the biggest, best established, have the most money. Their current budgets, and in many instances new budgets, to be responsive. So we talked about some of those, like the big regional economic agencies, and then of course the brand new programs like the wage subsidies that we've talked about. And I think the third thing is to think long term. Not everyone will be able to get a winning application out the door in the next 2 weeks, but our own view is that governments are here to stimulate our economy over the coming years as industries will face failure, and these programs, some will go away perhaps in a month or two, but there will continue to be long-term support for a economic recovery in the months and years ahead. Let me turn to a couple of quick case studies. It's always good to put what we've been talking about at a slightly macro level and apply it to a few case studies to show you how successful organizations are moving forward. And then we're going to, by 12:50, open it up open it up for some questions and answers from you. And thank you for those who've been putting in your questions. Karen will be monitoring those and bringing some common questions forward for us. So we congratulate Winnipeg Metropolitan Region. It encompasses the whole area outside of Winnipeg, and they have come together as a group of multiple municipal organizations to identify a $28 million broadband strategy for their region. It is just as soon as you step outside of Winnipeg, it becomes really very rural in some areas, and lacking high speed entirely. So they have all collaborated under the strengths of an organization called WMR, and pulled together a $28 million project, and will be seeking a very significant capital contribution by the federal government under the program that we mentioned, the Broadband Fund. 3 organizations in the public sector, I think, have done a great job of moving forward. CNAM is a Canadian network of asset managers. It's Calgary-based, but national in scope. Unfortunately, they just had to cancel their national conference, but they work on behalf of 330 Canadian municipalities to help them get municipal infrastructure dollars, and we're pleased to be their partner for helping cities to be applicants in the same way that companies are as well. One example of the success coming out of CNAM is the City of Windsor, where we helped them recently to win $31 million to fund 12 major infrastructure projects. It cost them perhaps $25,000 or $30,000, and they secured $31 million that they wouldn't have otherwise done by identifying the programs that were right for them and moving forward with an application, and the whole thing was turned around in really within a very few months. So I think that's a really fantastic example of the benefits of getting organized and moving forward. And I already mentioned NSBI, who has licensed some of our SaaS tools to put them on their website and invite people in their province to come forward and instantly be able to see the federal and provincial programs to which they can apply. We also congratulate then some of the mid-sized 5G tech companies. 5G's kind of been off the table for a week or two as COVID has dominated everything. But, Canada is trying to move forward and develop some domestic capability in 5G, and has set up a significant number of funds for that, and encourage companies who can contribute to domestic 5G capability to have a strong look at the programs that exist there. One could argue more important than ever to have that capability. Also then, clean tech is an area that is a high priority within Canada, and lots of money to pursue. NRC IRAP has been a great supporter of the clean tech sector, and very focused on micro companies, those with under 10 employees. So we've been doing lots of work in that sector to help people get that important money. We've talked a bit about our SaaS. I won't take your time on that now, but we're really proud of the tools that we've built and are powering a variety of other organizations today. And if you have an interest in that, please don't hesitate to reach out. We've talked a bit about how to stay informed, and highlight again the 3 kind of newsletters that are out there and very specific to sharing information about these programs with you at this time. I'll highlight some contact information, and then we'll turn to your questions. So we're at fundingportal.com. We have a national toll-free phone number. It's all ringing out to cell phones like everybody else these days, but we're picking up our phone during business hours across Canada. You'll see the number there. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally, and you can book a demo or book a consult at fundingportal.com/demo. Let's turn then, Karen. Are there any, what kind of key questions have come popping in?
Oops. So yes, thank you, Teri. I believe I just accidentally took down the slide, so just give me a moment to
Oh,
put
no
that back
problem.
up. I was looking at all the questions. So we actually got a big influx of questions, more than 50, and we won't be able to answer all of them on the line today, but we will be emailing answers to them in the follow-up email. So don't worry if we don't get to you. First question is for you, Teri. So my business has an office in the U.S. Can you help us get funding there too?
Yeah, thank you very much. We have focused our comments on Canada today, but Fundingportal does operate in 3 countries, in the U.S., and the U.K., and Canada, and we provide equivalent services certainly in the U.S. So if you're just a U.S. company on its own, we certainly work with you to identify the U.S. incentives. If you're a multinational with operations on both sides of the border, then we can certainly do a comprehensive report on the subsidies and incentives that exist in your state, for example, whether it's Texas or California or New York, and at the federal level, as well as Canadian subsidies that exist. We're very practiced at doing that. Sometimes we do comparative analysis of where you might best carry out an activity, let's say South Carolina or Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, for example, and comparing the grants and incentives that exist. That's often called place-based consulting. And, we do lots of work on that. I might mention that in the U.S., that in normal days, incentives sit at about $180 billion US that are available to support businesses through federal and state-based incentives. So that number is sitting closer at $250 billion US right now. So there is a lot of money and a goal to get it out the door and stimulate the economy as here. Thanks, Karen. And I know we're pretty much out of time, so maybe just a couple other quick questions.
Yes, let's do a question for Crown Capital. After COVID is over, how do I get both a grant and private capital to grow my business in the future?
Thanks, Karen. I think it's definitely going to be difficult for us to look past COVID, given it's on top of mind. So I think one of the things that companies should be focusing on is looking at the grants and private funding available even right now. And Teri had mentioned the Canada Emergency Business Account, where companies are able to get loans up to $40,000, and $10,000 of that is even deemed to be non-repayable under certain circumstances. I think it's important for companies to really understand their needs, have really complete packages and applications. That's going to be useful for both the loans available during COVID, and then as they come out, having real clear understandings of their capital needs going forward.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sure there's a question there that's right for Alexandria, Karen.
There is. So there's a lot of news about COVID right now. How do I take all this information and, in a practical level, turn it into money for my business?
It's a great question. We're all being inundated with a lot of information, more obviously than normal to scale. And my advice is those who are informed are ultimately going to reap the benefits of these stimulus packages. I know my organization makes a concerted effort to only publish information that we know is pertinent to our readers. We prioritize both information immediacy and data accuracy, and those 2 key points when our listeners are looking to subscribe to certain media are critical in your decision making. The government uses media as a vehicle to drive this messaging and announcements about policies on a continual basis. And without access to this information in detail that is data supported, organizations would be left in the dark and ultimately, in this specific scenario, would be leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to end on. So we have tried to share with you the ways that you can access the specialty news products that Alexandra has referenced in our own news feed as well, and to get more granular about the specific programs for your organizations. The 2 best ways to do that are our fund search tool, again a bit like hotels.com. All of the new COVID programs have been tagged as such. So you'll see that there's a field where you can enter in a keyword, and if you enter in COVID-19, your search will be responsive to identify the new programs that are right for your organization, meet your other eligibility criteria. So that's one way. And for those with a few $1,000, we'll do a custom workup for you and really help you understand how to access all the programs we've been talking about today and many more. So thank you so much for coming out, and we wish you extremely best wishes in moving forward with this, and hope you enjoyed our webinar today. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn off the webinar software now.